archaeologists uncovered a Hebrew text that predates any previous text by at least 200 years. Our guest today, Dr. Scott Stripling, is a practicing archaeologist. He believes the answer to that question is likely yes. He's just published a peer-reviewed journal article in its defense, and this is one of his first interviews since. We're going to discuss his case, how it's been received by scholars, and why this finding is so significant. Scott, thanks for coming on. It's been overdue, you coming on my channel. This is a great excuse to do so. But take me and my viewers back to that moment where you first uncovered this tablet, and we will talk about what it is, where you must have thought, wait a minute, I could be onto something very significant.
Well, Sean, thanks for having me on, and it's a very exciting thing to talk about. I led a team in December of 2019 to an expedition on Mount عيبال, and Mount عيبال is, of course, biblically the mountain of the curse. The blessings of the covenant were pronounced from Mount Gerizim, the curses from Mount عيبال. Joshua 8:30 says that Joshua built an altar on Mount عيبال. Adam Zertal in the 1980s excavated that site and left behind his dump piles, like all digs have. After they examine the material, they leave it behind. We have perfected, I wouldn't say we developed the technology of wet sifting, but we perfected it. And I became a big believer that we could recover up to 75% of the material that had been lost. In other words, the majority of the small finds have been thrown away in the past because they're dirt encrusted and you simply can't see them. So we were able to take the dump piles left behind, process them using this new technology of wet sifting, and in that process we recovered many things, one of them being a small folded lead tablet that we refer to in archaeological parlance as a defixio, or a cursed tablet. It's a known quantity in the archaeological world. We've seen hundreds of them. The puzzling thing when I saw this, and I thought my heart was going to jump out of my chest when I saw it, and Frankie Snyder, who's our most experienced wet sifter, providentially, it was in her tray. And when she saw this, she called me over and said, Scott, you better come see this. And when I did, I just, like I said, I thought I was going to faint there because I knew what it was, a cursed tablet from the mountain of the curse. And we could see there were glyptic markings on the outside, but it was very small. And but from that point on, I knew that it would be important. The big problem was it was made of lead, and the writing was going to be on the inside. Would we be able to recover the text?
Okay, we'll come to that. So to make sure I understand, this other archaeologist, I think you said in the 80s, was digging at Mount عيبال, left behind just kind of sifted material he assumed had no significance. You come along and say, wait a minute, it's possible that in this material from his first dig, we might find some archaeological nuggets. Now we have better technology. Let's go through what was left behind and see what we find. Is that fair?
That's exactly what happened. And, you know, not to say he wasn't good, because they were very thorough. We also dry sifted it the same way that he did. We went back to the dump and dry sifted everything, but then we took it through another process of wet sifting. So we missed it in dry sifting just like they did. It was only in the final process of wet sifting that we recovered it.
Okay, so the obvious question somebody might say is, all right, how do we know, Scott, that somebody didn't know you were digging there? They saw your team. And if you're going to place a fake, this seems like a very logical place to fake it because that's where somebody's going to find it. How can we rule out that as a possibility?
Right, and this could have been aliens who did it too. I mean, I guess all things are possible.
Okay.
Well, nobody knew we were doing it, for one thing. It was sort of covert because it's in a very sensitive area. But let's just say that someone, whatever, thought they were going to put a forgery in this pile. The problem with that is, number one, the lead comes from a mine in Greece, Lavrion, Greece, because we've had chemically tested the lead, and we know that mine was in use in the late Bronze Age. That means somebody got lead from Greece, from a mine that we know was being used for exports to Israel at that time. And that person happened to also be one of a handful of people in the world with expertise in writing in a proto-alphabetic script that predated Paleo-Hebrew. And somehow they were able to create patina in age and seal this because it takes centuries for the lead to become brittle, and it's now brittle. So it's pretty problematic to see this as a forgery.
Okay, before we get into the text itself, where is Mount Ebal in Israel? Give us a sense of geographically, and why is this area so sensitive, like you mentioned?
Let's take it back to Abraham, Sean. The Abrahamic covenant was at Elon Moreh, which is right by Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, or biblical Shechem. So Mount Gerizim on one side, the western side, Mount Ebal on the eastern side. Between the two is ancient Shechem with deep patriarchal ties. Joseph's bones are buried there. Jesus encounters the woman at the well there. So very important area. That's where the Abrahamic covenant is cut. No wonder Moses in Deuteronomy 11 and Deuteronomy 27 told Joshua, when you come into the land and you gain a foothold, go to Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal to pronounce blessings and curses. He didn't tell them because that's where the Abrahamic covenant was cut. They knew that. We're the ones that sort of have to piece this back together.
Okay, tell us a little bit about your background. Some people might be saying, okay, who is this Dr. Scott Stripling? Why is he qualified in so many different things? Dating lead from Greece, reading the language and inscriptions that are on there, leading a team there. Tell us a little about your training you bring to this.
Well, I'm an archaeologist and a generalist. I have excavated at a number of sites in Israel and in Jordan. Currently, I am the lead archaeologist at ancient Shiloh, leading a consortium of 16 universities that are excavating there, Israel's first capital. And prior to this, we excavated for many years at Khirbet el-Maqater, which was a likely candidate for biblical eye of John 7 and 8, and also excavated in Jerusalem and in Jordan, and of course at Mount Ebal. So pretty extensive field experience. I have a PhD in ancient Near Eastern archaeology. I'm also a seminary graduate, so I'm pretty comfortable with the biblical text. And I'm not an expert in paleography or epigraphy. Okay. I have a team that has paleographers and epigraphers. I'm not an expert in ancient lead. I have a metallurgist who's on my team. I just have to know enough about these fields to be able to intelligently make decisions and to weigh that evidence out. So I have a numismatist, and I have a botanist, and I have a zooarchaeologist and an anthropologist. And so all of these members, and many, many more, are experts. So, Sean, we are what you would call a soft science. Really, we're a subscience of anthropology, but a soft science. But we interface with all of the hard sciences. So to directly answer your question, I'm not an expert in those areas, but I know enough about them to be able to intelligently lead that team.
Okay, so let's jump into the finding itself and talk about what it was and then why it's so significant. So you mentioned it's called this cursed tablet, ties into the book of Joshua. What exactly is this find? Tell us more about it. Break it down for us. And then I'll follow up and ask you, why does this find matter so much?
Picture a business card folded in half. That's the size of this tablet, the Fixio. So it's very small, 2 by 2 centimeters once it's folded, 4 by 2 centimeters before it's folded. So the letters that are on there are very small, and the style is very important. But we have found hundreds of these in Israel. You usually find them in things like graves, wells, anything that's kind of in the earth. And usually they're very petty sorts of curses, like, she stole my boyfriend, may her hair fall out, or something like that.
Are you serious?
Oh, yeah. They're very petty sorts of curses. What's important about this is that it is a self-imprecatory curse. And I believe that it's a titular sort of a curse that's summarizing the curses of Deuteronomy 27 and 28. Now, obviously, I am presupposing that the biblical text gives us a reliable historical record. So I have an ancient text, and I mean, Mount Ebal is not mentioned in any other source. All we have to go by is the Bible. The Bible says there was an altar there. Zertal discovered the altar. The Bible says they pronounced curses there, and we find a tablet that has curses written on it, beginning with the Hebrew word arur, curse.
So are there curse tablets outside of Israel that say the Canaanites or the Mesopotamians or some other group had as well?
Yes, so it's an ancient Near Eastern thing, not at all limited. You have it in Mesopotamia, you have it in Egypt. The thing that was curious about this is that we knew them most from the Hellenistic and Roman period. And that's the first thing I said to Frankie was there, and then Abigail, who was my assistant director. The very first thing I said to them was, this is awesome, but we've got no proof that it's from an earlier time period. You know, someone may have known or thought this was Joshua's altar in a much later period, because I've never seen the folded lead tablet type from an earlier period. We do, however, have a biblical text, Job 19:24, which 19:25 is kind of famous because it's the first mention of resurrection. But 19:24, Job says, "Oh, that my words were written on a lead tablet with an iron pen." And that many scholars would take Job as the oldest book in the Bible. Some would dispute that, but many would. No mention of the law of Moses. So let's just assume for a minute that it is very ancient.
Okay.
That mindset of writing on lead, and then it becomes binding once you do that, and once that it's sealed.
Wow, fascinating. Okay, so how do we date this, though? Because the claim that you're making is that this is at least 2 centuries earlier than any written text. How do we know roughly when it dates to? Because I've done more with like New Testament manuscripts, and sometimes there's a range of 50 years, a century. I can only imagine going back further that it would be even more difficult to date.
Okay, there's 3 ways by which we date. Number 1 is the archaeological context. So Adam Zertal excavated the site, and there were only 2 strata. There was Iron Age 1, and there was Late Bronze Age 2, and that's it. So that's it. Those are your only 2 choices. Either one, even if it's Iron Age 1, it's still 200 years older than anything that's ever been found. I mean, if you're taking the Khirbet Kayaf Ostragon, for example, as the earliest Hebrew inscription, and that would be probably the one that everyone would accept. You know, there's some other maybe fringe possibilities. But the indications are that this is actually older and into the late Bronze Age. So number 1 is archaeological context. There's only 2 choices. Okay. Either one, it's older. Number 2, the lead tests as coming from Lavrion, Greece. That the mine in Lavrion is in use in the late Bronze Age, and everyone agrees that exports from Greece to Israel stopped around 1200. So you're looking at a pre-1200 date. If it's from Lavrion and exports stopped around that time, then it's pre-1200, which makes it a couple hundred years older than the Kayaf Ostragon. And then number 3 is the epigraphy, the style of writing. So this particular style of writing we call proto-alphabetic script. It's when hieroglyphs are transitioning into an alphabetic script. So like Middle Egyptian, if Moses, and I assume that Moses did know Middle Egyptian, he would have been dealing with maybe 700 symbols in Middle Egyptian. Imagine trying to write the Pentateuch with 700 symbols. But if you have a 22-letter phonetic alphabet, like the ox head is morphing into an aleph, is an example, then you can write in a much more truncated space. So many of these inscriptions are known, all right, from the Sinai and from Canaan. People have referred to them as Proto-Sinaitic, Proto-Canaanite, but nobody's really had the guts, if you will, to call it Proto-Hebrew. And it's a risky proposition, Sean, because the Canaanites and the early Israelites used the same alphabet. Like I've got a Muslim neighbor, we're using the same alphabet. So how do you know that it's one and not the other? The only way that I know of to be sure is if there's language, if there's specific words that are uniquely Israelite or exclusively Canaanite, then we can say with certainty. So that's what we have. In this inscription, we actually have words that are only used by the Israelites. So you've got the epigraphy, you've got the archaeological context, and you've got the source of the mine. Those 3 triangulate to give us a date somewhere between 1200 and 1400 BC.
Okay, talk to me a little bit more about how we know this is kind of a Proto-Hebrew writing. So I imagine when some people hear this and they hear this is the earliest Hebrew text, they're thinking it might be similar to the Dead Sea Scrolls or similar to the way the Masoretic text was copied or whatever comes to their mind. You're saying it's not that Hebrew. it's an earlier version that's preparing for Hebrew, but in your mind shares certain words that tells us it's not Canaanite, but it's distinctly Hebrew. So talk about what that kind of text was, and maybe just clarify what in your mind tells us this is Hebrew. It shares certain words that tells us it's not Canaanite, but it's distinctly Hebrew. So talk about what that kind of text was, and maybe just clarify what in your mind tells us this is Hebrew, not Canaanite.
Okay, that's a great way of putting it. I also have a background in English. I have a master's degree in English, so studied the development of the English language as well. We have Old English, which would be represented by Caedmon's hymn, the oldest example we have, and then a little bit later, Beowulf. If you look at the text of Caedmon's hymn, it's barely recognizable. You'll pick out a few words here and there, but you'll barely recognize it as English. Middle English would be like Chaucer's English, say the Canterbury Tales. You'd recognize most of it, but some of it you wouldn't. And then, of course, you have modern English, which we speak. And then, of course, where I am, we have Texan, which is another variety of it as well. So you see a development of the English language. You have the exact same thing going on in Hebrew. We have modern Hebrew. We have Paleo-Hebrew, which is biblical Hebrew. And then we have the ancestor of that, which is Proto-alphabetic Hebrew. That's the script we're talking about. So even if someone disagrees with our reading, which we'll get to in a little bit, of the inscription, you cannot disagree with the fact that it's proto-alphabetic, which means it's late Bronze Age, which means if we're right that it's Hebrew, then it's clearly the oldest script that we know of.
Okay, let's talk about that reading or writing that you were talking about that's actually in the tablet itself. Go ahead and break that down for us, if you will.
Okay, well, essentially we have 48 letters, and the writing at this time is not standardized. That's one of the ways that you know that it's proto-alphabetic is because it's not standardized. It can go right to left, left to right, horizontally or vertically. And this is why there's always disagreement on what it says, because it depends on which way you read it. So you have to weigh a variety of factors. 48 letters, and you have a repetition of the word arur, or curse. You have the name of the God of Israel, Yahweh, or Yahu in this version, twice. So essentially, it's a chiasm, or a literary parallelism that says, cursed, cursed, cursed. Cursed are you by the God Yahweh. Cursed by Yahweh you will surely die. Cursed, cursed, cursed. So essentially, you're saying it, then you're inverting it and saying it in a different kind of a way. So I think that it's, I would be shocked if there are other tablets that would be found like this on Mount Ebal. I think it's one that was written on behalf of the nation, that was part of a covenant renewal ceremony that's documented in the Bible.
Okay, so how do we have confidence? I remember when this finding first came out, there were some people that pushed back and said, I'm not sure in this proto-alphabet it's really Yahweh. And there were different ways to understand and interpret the God. How do we know it's the Israel God Yahweh versus some other God or some other deity, or maybe it could be interpreted in some other non-deific fashion, so to speak?
Well, if they accept the reading, anyone who was being critical at that time had not yet seen the scans. The academic article is now published, and published in a very highly rated, highly respectable academic journal. So everybody can look at the scans for themselves, and if they agree that that is a yod, that is a he, that is a vav, if that's not Yahoo, then I don't know what is. And you have that earliest version, the three-letter spelling, incidentally, is what you would more typically find in the earliest time periods. And we have this in Egypt, in the Soleb hieroglyph. And so this is in the reign of Amenhotep III. The inscription says, the land of the Shasu, or nomads, of Yahoo. Well, there's only one group of people in the ancient world who are worshiping Yahweh, or Yahoo, and those are Israelites. So apparently there's a group of nomads that already have their own land who worship Yahweh, in 1360, 1370, thereabouts, when the Soleb inscription was formed. What I'm saying is that that's outside of Israel. This is for the first time we have found it inside of Israel, and it's even slightly older.
Okay, so I'm an apologist. So what is there an apologetic takeaway for this? Reliability of the scriptures, the existence of the Israelite people in a certain place. If this is genuine, as you argue, what significance does it have for kind of the Christian faith?
Well, I appreciate you framing it that way. I can take off my archaeological hat, and as an evangelical believer, I can certainly talk to you about apologetics. I think it has an important apologetic aspect because the criticism of the biblical text that it's not reliable, that it wasn't written until 1,000 years after it purports to have been written, that Moses and Joshua were illiterate, they could not have written it, even though Jesus said that Moses did. Those are big questions, Sean. Do we have a reliable biblical text? Do we have evidence of literacy at the earliest time periods? And let's face it, God told Joshua to write. And you only write if people can read. So there's this assumption of literacy. And if we do indeed have evidence at a place where God told him to write, of writing, and the script is from that time period, then I think there's a high degree of likelihood that you are looking at evidence that Moses and Joshua were indeed literate and capable of writing the Pentateuch and the Hexateuch as far as that goes.
Okay, so maybe clarification for folks. This is not a biblical text that was uncovered. Like sometimes this Hebrew writing, they found early inscriptions of Numbers or the book of Isaiah. Mm-hmm. This is a text in Proto-Hebrew that is of the kind of content in the kind of place that we would expect if there was Moses and Joshua writing these in the time that has been traditionally understood. Is that a fair way to think about it?
Yes. So they're told to pronounce curses from Mount Ebal, Deuteronomy 27 and 28. So all these curses, I think what you have here in these 48 letters is a summary of that. So it's capturing that idea, and then the curse tablet is placed on the altar because Zertal kept track of where the material was coming from. His east dump pile was material only from the altar itself. So that's where this tablet came from, was from the east dump. So if it comes from the earlier round altar, to let your viewers know, there's a 9x7 rectangular altar, and underneath it, which dates to the period of the Judges, underneath it at the perfect geometric center is a round altar that's 2x2 meters. It's that round altar that I believe is the best candidate for Joshua's altar. The fill within the larger altar, Zertal believed, came from that earlier round altar. And so what I'm saying is, according to Zertal, and I would agree with him, this fill, which is where the tablet came from, dated to that earlier round altar. So the picture would be this: that tablet is written, it's a curse, it's binding, and incidentally, everyone's in big trouble because you're cursed by the God Yahweh, all right? Okay. You're not cursed by Satan. We could deal with that. Just look at the book of Job. You can deal with that. No, you're cursed by Yahweh. It's checkmate. And it's then placed on the altar. And what happens on the altar? The shedding of innocent blood to cover the guilty. And so there's that theme started in Genesis 3. Here you see it in Joshua 8, portrayed in a very powerful way. There's the curse, and then covered by the blood. So the only man who will have that curse inured to him is the one who will not come to the altar.
I got to tell you, when I first saw the text, it's one thing to say cursed by Yahweh. It's like curse, 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 curse. It's like, I get it. Holy cow, this must be really, really bad, whatever they're trying to communicate. Now, you mentioned the peer-reviewed journal article, and this is an important development in this story, and we'll come back to it. But you also mentioned earlier that when you talked about it referring to Yahweh, some people were not able to see the inscription early on. And I did a show on this before, and some people are like, wait a minute, we want to see this. Now it's out, and so people can see it, and scholars seem to agree enough with you that you make a solid case that this should be taken seriously as Yahweh. Where is the heart of the debate on this? Is it on dating? Is it on the interpretation? Where's the heart of the difference on this issue?
There are very few scholars who are going to argue that this is not a proto-alphabetic script that dates to the late Bronze Age.
Okay.
The debate is going to be on, are we reading it correctly? Because it can be read left to right, or right to left, or top to bottom, or bottom to top, okay? All we're saying, my collaborative team, which is 3 scientists from Prague. Really interesting because the hard sciences come to bear. We had the computer technology that was involved in allowing us to penetrate the lead and to recover the text, which is fascinating in and of itself. And then we had the epigraphic work and then the archaeological work. So I was the lead author, and then we had Peter van der Veen and Gershon Galil, who were my epigraphers, one from Germany, one from Israel. And then I had the 3 scientists from Prague. So my team was collaborative in and of itself, and we consulted with a lot of other experts along the way too. Listen, I was in no hurry to stick my neck out and lose my reputation on this. So we dotted our I's and crossed our T's, so to speak. The article went through peer review, which means that other scholars in a blind review, 3 other reviewers also agreed that our reading was plausible and that the archaeology and the science behind it was sound, and that everyone else should have an opportunity to be able to assess it. So all I'm saying in the end, Sean, is that to the best of my ability, this is what I think it says. And are there others that are going to read it differently? Every inscription that's ever been released, there have been multiple readings of it. So I welcome the scholarly academic debate.
That's really helpful, because if it's in a peer-reviewed, there might be some Christians eager to say, this means it's true, we have the confirmation. So that might be going a little bit too far. But some skeptics who maybe have dismissed this from the outright, you're saying, maybe that's too quick. We have a reasonable, accepted, careful approach. This is a plausible interpretation, needs to be examined furthermore in the academic community. Is that a fair way of capturing how you see it? And
furthermore, it's an open access journal. Heritage Science is the name of the journal. So it's in the 93rd percentile. So it's very highly rated. And I heard some scholars, I just laughed. People would send me videos. This person said this and this person said that. Oh, Stripling, they'll never publish this, or it'll be in some rinky-dink journal of their own or whatever. They had no idea what was going on behind the scenes. I mean, we went big and did the very best that we could do. And there it is. It's online. Anybody can go to the website for Heritage Science, download the article, see the scans for themselves, including scholars or laymen.
So when I was doing my interview for Biola University, where this is my 10th year teaching apologetics, I'll never forget one of the deans that interviewed me said, you apologists can have a temptation to overstate things. But in academia, it's important, if anything, to understate things. And I try as best I can to have my confidence in a claim backed up by appropriate evidence. And sometimes I look back, I'm like, I probably could have said that more firmly. And other times I think I let my enthusiasm and my love for this get ahead of me. So what you just gave me was kind of the academic response, which is appropriate and it's fair and it's what you should do. I applaud that. How confident are you if I just said personally that this is really genuine?
Just between you and me, right?
Yeah, nobody else is watching this. And honestly, I would assess the evidence for the resurrection in academic journals. I have a different level of just personal conviction when I look at this that goes with it. So, and if there's no difference, that's fine. But how confident are you is really what my question is.
I'm 100% confident that it is a late Bronze Age text and that it's as early as 1400 BC. So Peter van der Veen and I believe that it's closer to 1400. Gershon Galil thinks it's closer to 1200. So either way, are you 200 years earlier or 400 years earlier than Caiapha? Of that, I'm 100% confident. The style of the script, the fact that we have proto-alphabetic writing, I have no doubt at all about that. The reading, what level of confidence do I have in the reading? I would say is very high, 90%. There are 4 letters within the 48 that we put in brackets that we're not sure about those letters. In my view, that doesn't change the reader. We are a year later this March with the academic article out, okay? But we'd started studying a couple of months before that. So you're talking hours a day, every day, looking at scans, analyzing. So I have that advantage, whereas when a scholar or anybody else looks at this for the first time, maybe their eyes are not going to as easily see what we can see through extensive study. So I'll give you one clue. When you and others are looking at these scans, it's not only that we think we're seeing a che, say a man with his arms raised in worship to God, but look on the outside of the tablet and we have bulges that reinforce that. So what we thought we were seeing on the inside, the markings, are reinforced by bulges on the outside of the tablet in the lead. So we're seeing it in positive and in negative.
Okay, so what I appreciate that you say when I analyze this and that my 2 cents of this text might matter, but I'll be quick to say I got nothing. I'm not an expert here. I have to look to you and others. So how would you encourage people to look at this and follow this story, knowing that probably 99% plus of people really don't have a clue how to read this? What advice? I've looked at them. It's interesting. It's fascinating, but I just realized my opinion doesn't carry a lot of weight on this. What advice would you give for people following this story, looking at it, not too quickly coming to a conclusion, realizing there's so much training required behind this to really follow truth?
I think a lot of people can benefit from the academic article, but now that article is out, we have other articles that are written on a popular level that are already written that are going to drop pretty quickly too. So people can keep their eyes on Bible and Spade, for example, for an article that's coming out on that. Abigail Levitt and I will then publish the whole project, the larger MEDS, Mount Ebal Dump Salvage, which is the name of the project. So we'll publish the larger project. So there'll be several things that'll be coming out that are more on a layman's level. There's lots of videos that are already out there, but there will be a whole lot more coming out as well. And then if they're courageous, they could dive into the peer-reviewed article. And what we do is we cover, first of all, the archaeological context, then the scientific recovery of the text from the scientists in Prague, which I didn't even know you could do when I started this. I did not know that lead could be penetrated by X-ray.
Amazing.
You know, when you go to the dentist and they put that lead thing on you, apparently that does no good because you can't penetrate that with scans. And then we get into the paleography. I mean, down to the nuts and bolts of every letter and what are the parallels for it and why do we think that it's this and not that? And, you know, so get into the nitty gritty of the alphabet and then of the conclusions.
So for you personally, maybe do a compare and contrast here. For the archaeological world, how big of a story is this compared to other stories that are dropping regularly? And how big of a story is it to you personally?
It's big, Sean. I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, this is a 10. I mean, if you look at, there were just 4 lists released from Israel, the top 10 finds of Israel in 2022. And this is before the academic article was even out. And in 3 of the 4 lists, this was the number 1 find. I think everybody recognized, and then on the other list, it was number 2. Everybody recognized that this is big. Now that the academic article is out, I think the gravitas will come to bear, and the ramifications are huge. And this is why I've called this a tsunami from Mount Ebal, because it reverberates. Do we indeed have evidence of literacy? Does this dismantle the documentary hypothesis? Because right next to Yahweh, we have El. So El Yahu side by side, and the whole basis of the documentary hypothesis is that these sources are hundreds of years apart. We have them side by side. So just think about it. All the generations of seminaries that have taught the documentary hypothesis, if this dismantles that, that's huge. So early literacy on a biblical level, an archaeological level, an anthropological and sociological level, the ramifications are big. As a believer, I think the issue is, do we have a reliable biblical text? And a lot of people have said that we don't. And I think this argues, or certainly puts the weight of evidence towards saying that we do. And I think that's important.
Okay, so you mentioned the documentary hypothesis. Maybe explain for some viewers who are not as familiar with it as you and I what it is, why you would take issue with it in principle, and in maybe a little bit more depth, what this finding, how it pushes back on that idea would be really helpful.
Well, Julius Wellhausen laid out his documentary hypothesis and followers of his then had different variations off of that. But essentially the idea is that the text is comprised in stages, and it's not redacted into its final form until, say, the Persian. But we have histories that are gradually being compiled, redacted, and then given to us in a final form in the Second Temple period. This disproves that, I believe, because it shows that the Jehovah source, the J source, and the Elohim source are in existence at the same time, not hundreds of years apart. And so that's, I think, we don't deal with that in the article, of course, because it's not theological.
That's fascinating. I can imagine there's going to be a lot of discussion and debate about that going forward. Walk us through a little bit this peer-reviewed process. I've done peer-reviewed articles, obviously not in archaeology, in another realm, and familiar with the process. But maybe those who are watching saying, okay, what does that mean? Who else is analyzing this? What are their qualifications? Walk through that process for us, if you will.
A peer-reviewed journal is blind. So if I'm the author, I don't know who the peer reviewers are. An article is submitted to an editor. That editor then invites peer reviewers, and he or she is looking for reviewers who have expertise in that area. Now, ours was problematic because you had to have expertise in computer science, you had to have expertise in epigraphy, and in archaeology. So it took a while. I was hoping this would be out during the summer, but it took a while for them to find qualified people. So we don't know who those people are. To this day, I don't know who these peer reviewers were.
Oh, wow.
And that's good. So it allows them to be very candid in their input. It will take anywhere from 1 month to 4 months normally, and we will get back the assessments of the reviewers. Those assessments will come from the editor, not from the reviewers themselves, and just say reviewer 1, reviewer 2, reviewer 3. Here's what they said. So like in this case, reviewer 1 was very complimentary. So this was earth-shattering. It was important. It was very well written. All of the writers in the editor said that it was written at the highest level. Okay. The second reviewer was under the impression that I was the Antichrist for some reason, and did not at all think that this was good, and thought that it was illegal and I had forged it and everything you can imagine. Wow. I think he had things to say about my mother. I mean, it just wasn't good. And then the third one was very complimentary, and all three of them had suggestions on ways that we could improve. This was a bit unclear. Maybe if you had another table that showed this differently. So the peer review process is not just to say yes and no, but it's to improve the product as well. And so I then had to answer all of those. So I had 72 responses that I had to write back to the editor. Wow. Some of them were very, very simple responses. Others were complex, And then we had to make adjustments to the article, or if we weren't going to make an adjustment, explain why we weren't going to make the adjustment. And you have to understand my collaborative partners are on different continents. So Europe and Asia, so we got time differences going on. So I responded to all 72, updated the text, sent it back. About a month later, I got back the next response from the editor. Reviewers 1 and 3 basically had nothing more to say other than this is awesome, and it's controversial but revolutionary, and it deserves to be heard. And even reviewer 2 had softened at this point.
Okay, all right.
He had made accusations that this was illegal and so forth, and so I had sent the documentation showing the legally signed documents and so forth. So of course he could no longer claim that. But all three of them recommended that it be published, and then we were notified, and now the article's out.
Wow, that's really awesome. Now, talk for a second about the legal perspective. If this is in Israel, obviously there's certain authorities they're going to want to own this, and not some American taking something out of Israel and doing his own thing. What is that? Tell me about that dynamic.
Well, what we did was we got an export permit. So I wanted to take the tablet to Prague because the lab in Prague had expertise and a track record of scanning through lead. So the Antiquities Authority signed an export permit allowing it to be taken to Prague. And so when I showed that to the editor, there's nothing more that reviewer could say. Somebody had told him something, and he believed some bad information. But yeah, it's complex. We're in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, and since 1993, Judea, Samaria has been carved up between areas A, B, and C. This is in area B, so it's the most sensitive area of the most sensitive part of the world. Outside of that, it was not a problem at all. Okay?
Yeah. So I'm picturing you with like a briefcase holding this cursed tablet, potentially worth millions or tens of millions of dollars. Do you just carry this thing on a plane to Prague?
Yeah, like Fredo and Godfather just showing up with a briefcase. No, actually, Zwi Konisberg, who's a colleague of mine and was a liaison for me in the project, actually couried the tablet to Prague for me. So,
wow.
My appreciation to him for doing that.
Who funds all the research? Is this a Christian organization? Is this funded by a university? Who's behind funding this?
The initial funding came from my organization, which is the Associates for Biblical Research. But BibleArchaeology.org is our website, and they funded the initial meds project along with the supporting research that went with it, and it was not inexpensive. So my appreciation to my organization for standing behind us and believing in this, and we also received funding from Prague, from the university there, that supported the scientific aspect of it. So some from Associates for Biblical Research, and then some from the university in Prague.
Is this stressful to you? Is this fun? Is it exciting? Like, what are the range of emotions thinking? Because you mentioned earlier, like, your reputation is on the line. There's legal aspects. There's so many different things. Is there a sense where you're like, this is what I've been waiting for my whole life? Or is there a sense of like, oh, I found this. This has created more work and time and stress than I imagined. How are you processing this?
Well, it was very exciting. When I was sitting on Mount Ebal, and I could see the top of the round altar, and in fact, my foot was resting on top of that round altar. And as I sat there, I just had a sense that this was very providential, what we were going to do. And then, the tablet came to light. The whole process began to unfold and take on a life of its own. When we had the press conference last March, the reason that I did that is because I had released photos of the outside of the tablet, not knowing that there was text on the outside. At the time, I only thought there was text on the inside. So it was my fault for releasing those photos. I had no idea that we had text on the outside. But after having released them, other scholars, it is online these days, people began to see things and detect them and began to postulate attempting to decipher this text, at which point I was then in danger, attempting to decipher this text, at which point I was then in danger of academic piracy, of losing my own inscription.
Oh, wow.
Somebody else interpreting this. And that's why we did the press conference when we did, to make the announcement, to essentially stake out the ground that this is ours, mine as the lead excavator. That's what led to that. So my emotions were a wide array, from exhilaration to overwhelming sense of weight, because the research and the whole process was extremely complex. The hardest thing I've ever done, as a matter of fact. Very difficult.
Wow.
But that's why we do what we do, Sean. The goal of archaeology is not excavation, it's publication. If I excavate and don't publish, all I'm doing is destroying the evidence and making it inaccessible to others. So this is the end product of why we do what we do, so that we can then engage in the arena of ideas.
Well, that's exciting stuff. Where does this go forward? So the peer review is out. Now, there's probably going to be other people who write peer review journals. There's going to be podcasts, other YouTube interviews, debates. Like, what are some of the steps coming up for people who want to follow this well? And how long does it take for stories like this to play itself out?
Well, this one's going to play out pretty quickly. We know from the announcement last March, there were between 25 and 50 million people who watched the press conference last March. And then,
wow.
all the secondary stuff. It's hard to quantify those exact numbers in today's world, but so there will be a lot of information. If someone Googles my name or Mount Ebal tablet, I'm sure they'll see a listing of interviews and things that people have to say. My organization, Associates for Biblical Research, and my school, the Bible Seminary in Katy, if they're sort of wanting to hear it from the horse's mouth, they can access me through those means. My personal website is scottstripling.net, and they can also contact me there.
Boy, that's exciting stuff. I appreciate your work on this. Really look forward to how this story plays itself out. Did I miss anything? Is there anything else you want to cover? Anything else you want to clarify? Anything else people should know about just this process and the find and what it means?
Well, I would just say, I guess, kind of tongue-in-cheek, that all my life I wanted to be known for a blessing, but instead of a curse. But it's kind of a blessing in disguise, really, because it has caused us to think about big questions, big and important questions. Are there consequences for my actions? I mean, that's one thing that the tablet, I think, asks. Is there a curse? How do you get rid of the curse? These are big questions, big things that I'm glad that people are talking about, and I'm glad that I get to be a part of that discussion. So thanks for having me on today.
Oh, my goodness. Thanks for your work. This is such an interesting story. I appreciate you giving me and our team here at Biola one of your first interviews on this. Super honored. And good work. Want to encourage you to keep it up. And before you go away, I want to make sure folks who are with us hit subscribe, because archaeology is a topic we talk about now and then, new finds, old finds. So if you want biblical archaeology, make sure you subscribe. And if you thought about studying apologetics, we'd love to have you at Biola. We actually have an adjunct professor, a friend of yours, Scott